The sound was not a slap. It was the cracking of the world. My father's hand, calloused and smelling of engine grease and cheap whiskey, connected with my cheek with a force that snapped my head to the side and sent a constellation of white-hot stars exploding across my vision. The taste of copper, sharp and metallic, bloomed on my tongue. I did not cry out. I had learned over 17 years that sound only fed the beast. Ungrateful wretch, he snarled, his breath a foul cloud in the frozen air of the drafty farmhouse kitchen. After all we've sacrificed, you'll go to the city with Gregor, you'll do your duty for this family, and you will not disgrace us with your scribbling. My mother stood by the chipped enamel sink, her back to me, her shoulders a rigid line of silent complicity. She was washing the same plate over and over, the repetitive squeak of porcelain her only prayer. She was a ghost in her own life, and she had long ago decided it was easier to haunt than to fight. In her silence, she was louder than my father's roar. On the rough-hewn wooden table between us lay the source of the cataclysm, my sketchbook. Its pages, filled with charcoal renderings of the stark, skeletal winter trees beyond our fields, of the weary slope of my mother's back, of the haunting, beautiful melancholy I saw in everything. And one page, the most damning of all, a drawing of a face. Cale, the boy from the neighboring farm, with eyes the color of a stormy sea and hands that held mine not with ownership, but with wonder. He had seen my soul through my drawings, and I had seen a future in his quiet smile. My father had found it. He hadn't just seen a drawing of a boy, he had seen defiance. He had seen a path leading away from the preordained future he had carved for me, a marriage of convenience to the brutish, middle-aged Gregor, a merger of two struggling farms that would seal me in this frozen, loveless landscape forever. "It's just drawing, Papa," I whispered, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a desperate, final hope. "It's disobedience," he bellowed, snatching the sketchbook from the table. He didn't merely tear the pages. He methodically, viciously, shredded each one, the sound of ripping paper a more profound violence than the slap. He was not destroying paper. He was dismembering my soul, scattering the pieces into the cold ashes of the hearth. The face of Cale, the trees, my mother's sorrow all curled and blackened in the dying fire. "It's airs and nonsense. You think you're better than this? Better than us? You are nothing without this family. Nothing." He threw the ravaged leather cover at my feet. It landed with a soft, final thud. My mother finally turned. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as mine, met mine for a fleeting second. There was no apology there, only a desperate, fearful plea for me to submit, to make the storm pass. In that look, I felt the last thread of my childhood attachment to this place, to them, sever. My father pointed a thick, shaking finger toward the door, toward the blizzard that had begun to rage outside, whipping snow against the window panes like a frantic, white swarm. "Get out," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Go on, take your precious art and see how far it gets you. But know this, Lyra, you walk out that door, you are dead to us. Don't ever come back." The words hung in the frigid air, crystallizing into a verdict. They were not a threat. They were a sentence. I looked at my mother. She dropped her gaze to the floor. That was her answer. A strange calm descended upon me. The pain, the fear, the heartbreak, it all receded, replaced by a glacial clarity. I did not speak. There were no words left in the world that could bridge the chasm that had just opened in that room. I bent down, picked up the scorched, empty cover of my sketchbook. Then, wearing only my thin indoor dress and a worn wool shawl, I turned my back on my parents, on the only home I had ever known, and I walked to the heavy oak door. I pulled it open. The wind howled in, a blast of Arctic air that stole my breath and whipped my long, brown hair around my face. The world beyond was a swirling, white void. I did not hesitate. I did not look back. I walked into the snow that night, and never looked back. If you believe revenge isn't evil, it is the voice of justice rising from pain. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to Silent Revenge. The cold was not a temperature. It was a predatory entity. It did not simply surround me. It invaded. It slipped through the threads of my shawl, pressed its icy fingers against my skin, and began to siphon the warmth from my blood. Each step into the knee-deep snow was a monumental effort, a battle against an element that wanted me to lie down, to sleep, to become just another part of the frozen landscape. The farmhouse lights vanished within minutes, swallowed by the relentless white static of the blizzard. There was no moon, no stars, only the swirling, dizzying chaos of snow. The wind screamed in my ears, a maddening, constant roar that drowned out all other sound, even the ragged gasp of my own breathing. I was alone in a universe of howling whiteness. I walked without direction, driven only by the primal need to put distance between myself and the life I had left. My father's words echoed in the wind. "You are nothing." The memory of the tearing paper was a fresh wound with every gust. My fingers, curled into frozen claws, clutched the empty sketchbook cover. It was a tombstone for my old self, a pathetic, scorched relic. What had I been thinking? That beauty mattered? That a few lines on a page could be a passport to a different life? Out here, in the raw, killing indifference of nature, such notions were the height of insanity. My art was dead. Lyra was dead. The physical agony became a forge that burned away everything else. My wet dress froze into a rigid, icy shell. My feet, clad only in thin leather shoes, went from burning pain to a terrifying numbness. I stumbled, fell, and pushed myself up, my hands sinking into the deep, soft snow. The temptation to stay down, to let the cold cradle me into its final, peaceful sleep, was a seductive whisper. It would be so easy to prove my father right, to become nothing. But something stubborn, a tiny, guttering ember deep in my core, refused to be extinguished. It was not hope. Hope was too fragile a thing for this hell. It was rage, a pure, undiluted fury at the injustice of it all, that they had thrown me away like this, that my own mother had let it happen, that my life, my dreams, were worth less than a few acres of barren land and a marriage to a man I despised. I thought of Cale, his face now ashes. Would he even look for me? Or would my family tell him I had run away, that I was a shameful, headstrong girl who got what she deserved? The thought fueled the angry ember. I would not give them the satisfaction. I would not die in this field, a cautionary tale for other disobedient daughters. I don't know how long I walked. Time lost all meaning. The world was reduced to a cycle of lifting a leg, plunging it into the void, and dragging the other one forward. My consciousness narrowed to a single burning point. Move. I was no longer a girl. I was a body, a machine of pain and determination, operating on the last dregs of its fuel. Just as the last of my strength was about to fail, as the darkness at the edges of my vision began to bleed into the center, I saw a faint orange glow in the distance. It was not the warm, welcoming light of a home, but the hazy, industrial halo of a town, reflecting off the low snow clouds. Salvation, or perhaps just a different kind of end. I pushed toward it, my movements becoming frantic, delirious. I stumbled onto a road, hard-packed and icy beneath the fresh powder. The going was easier, but the wind was sharper, funneled by the ditches. I followed the glow, my body moving on an instinct I did not know I possessed. I finally reached the outskirts of a small, sleeping town. The houses were dark, hunched shapes under their thick blankets of snow. I collapsed against the rough brick wall of a closed general store, my legs finally giving way. The shivering was so violent it felt like my bones were trying to escape my skin. I was in a town, but I was still in the wilderness. I had escaped the snow, but I was now adrift in a world that had no place for a penniless, shivering girl with nothing but the charred cover of a dead dream. I had survived the storm, but as I huddled in that doorway, watching my breath form pathetic little clouds in the air, I knew a colder, deeper winter had settled inside me. The girl who loved, who dreamed, who drew, was gone. What was left was hollow, hard, and fiercely, terribly alone. The town of Northwood was a place of grit, not grace. Its heart was a lumber mill that coughed black smoke into the sky, and its soul was the hard, unyielding practicality of people who wrested a living from the unforgiving land. I was an alien here, a ghost of a different world. For days, I survived on sheer, dumb luck and the reluctant, fleeting charity of strangers. A bowl of soup from a back door, a stale roll tossed my way by a baker's wife who couldn't quite look me in the eye. I slept in barns, in abandoned sheds, anywhere I could find a reprieve from the cold. I was an animal, scrounging for survival. My hands, once skilled at capturing the delicate curve of a leaf, were now raw, chapped, and useless. The empty sketchbook cover remained my only possession, a mocking reminder of my former life. I would stare at its blank, fire-stained interior and feel nothing but a hollow ache. The urge to create had been beaten and frozen out of me. My salvation, such as it was, came in the form of Morwen, the owner of a squalid tavern called the Grizzled Boar. He was a hulking man with a patch over one eye and a temperament as sour as the beer he served. He didn't offer me charity. He offered a transaction. You can wash dishes, scrub floors, empty chamber pots, he grunted, his single eye sweeping over my gaunt frame with disdain. You'll sleep in the storeroom. You'll get 1 meal a day. And you'll not speak to the patrons. You're a shadow here, girl. Understood? I understood. It was indentured servitude, but it was a roof, and the storeroom, while stinking of old ale and damp rot, was warmer than the snow. I became his ghost. I worked until my hands were pruned and burning from lye soap, until my back ached from scrubbing, until the stench of the place seeped into my pores and felt like it would never leave. The patrons, mill workers and trappers were a loud, coarse bunch. I moved among them like a phantom, invisible, collecting their empty tankards and wiping up their spills. It was in the Grizzled Boar that I learned the true geography of human misery. I saw the same dead-eyed look I saw in my mother's face on the wives who came to drag their drunken husbands home. I heard the same hollow rage I felt in my father in the boasts and fights of the men. I was at the bottom, looking up at a world that was just different shades of the same struggle. Weeks turned into months. The deep snows melted into a muddy, reluctant spring. The hollow feeling inside me did not fade. It calcified. I spoke to no one. I felt nothing. I was an automaton, performing my duties, eating my single meal, and retreating to my pallet in the storeroom. I was waiting for something, though I didn't know what. One evening, a traveling merchant, his clothes finer than the local wool and leather, sat in a corner, nursing an ale. He was frustrated, trying to explain a new design for a merchant seal to the town's only carpenter, a man named Alaric, who was more brawn than artistry. The merchant sketched a clumsy shape on a scrap of paper. No, it needs to have flourish. A presence, he complained. Alaric just shook his head, baffled. I carve straight lines, sir, beams and joints. Not this fancy work. From my spot in the shadows, wiping down a table, I saw the drawing. It was inelegant, unbalanced. My hand, almost of its own volition, twitched. The dormant part of my brain, the part that understood line and form, stirred for the first time in half a year. Later that night, after the tavern had closed, I found a piece of charcoal from the hearth. On the back of a discarded inventory list, I quickly, deftly, redrew the merchant's seal. I gave it the flourish he wanted, adding subtle curves and a sense of weight and balance. It was an unconscious act, a muscle memory. I left the drawing on a barrel where Alaric would find it. The next day, Alaric sought me out. He held the paper, his brow furrowed. Did you do this? He asked, his voice low. I flinched, expecting anger, accusation. I merely nodded, bracing for the blow. He stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at me, and for the first time, someone in Northwood was truly seeing me. Not a ghost, not a servant, but a person with a skill. It's good, he said, the words foreign on his tongue. The merchant was right pleased. He began to bring me small jobs, a design for a sign, a sketch for a piece of furniture. He paid me in a few coppers, sometimes in a warm loaf of bread. It was nothing, and it was everything. The charcoal felt alien and familiar in my hand. The lines I drew were hesitant at first, then stronger. I was not drawing trees or faces anymore. I was drawing practical things, commercial things. But I was creating. The ice around my soul began to crack. I was no longer just surviving. I was observing, learning, storing away every piece of knowledge, every interaction. I saw how Morwen cheated his suppliers. I learned the value of things from the merchants. I saw the power of a well-drawn contract, a compelling design. The rage that had kept me alive in the snow had not disappeared. It had been refined, focused. It was no longer a wildfire, but the heat required to forge a weapon. I was no longer the girl who was thrown away. I was becoming the woman who would decide her own worth. 5 years, they had carved me into someone else. The gaunt, terrified girl was gone. In her place was a woman of quiet intensity, her hazel eyes holding a depth of knowledge that belied her age. My hands, though still skilled with a charcoal pencil, were now also skilled with ledgers, with contracts, with the language of commerce. The coppers from Alaric's jobs had become a small stake. That stake, through a series of calculated risks, buying furs from trappers before the merchants arrived, brokering deals for lumber shipments, designing distinctive trademarks for burgeoning local businesses, had grown. I had become Northwood's silent, unseen engine of trade, operating under the name the Greywood Company. No one knew Lyra, the dishwasher, was its architect. I lived simply, but I had accumulated not just wealth but power. The power of information, the power of debt. I knew which farmers were mortgaged to the hilt, which merchants were on the verge of collapse. And I knew, with a cold, specific clarity, that my father's farm was one bad season from ruin. Gregor had proven a poor partner, and a series of harsh winters had taken their toll. The land was dying, and so were their prospects. The time had come. I arrived in a sleek black motor car, a machine that looked like it had descended from another planet onto the muddy ruts of my childhood lane. I was dressed not in silks, but in a severe, impeccably tailored wool suit the color of slate. My hair was coiled precisely at my nape. I wore no jewelry. My wealth was not in adornment, but in the cut of my clothes, the stillness of my posture, the absolute authority in my gaze. I did not go to the farmhouse first. I went to Cale's family farm. He was there, taller, broader, his stormy eyes clouded with a permanent sorrow. When he saw me, he froze, the bucket of feed in his hand forgotten. Lyra, he breathed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. They said you were gone. I was, I said, my voice calm, devoid of the tremor he might have expected. Now I am back. I did not embrace him. I did not cry. I presented him with a business proposition, a merger, his family's land which bordered my father's, for a significant investment, a partnership in Greywood. I offered him a future, not out of sentiment, but because his family were good, honest farmers, and their land was valuable. I saw the love and the hurt in his eyes, but I kept my heart encased in ice. That was a luxury I could not yet afford. Then, I went to my father's farm. It was more dilapidated than I remembered, the fences sagging, the fields choked with weeds. I walked to the door, the same door I had been thrown out of, and knocked. My mother opened it. She looked a decade older, her face a roadmap of hardship. Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. She did not recognize the woman before her, and then, horrifyingly, she did. Lyra, she whispered, her voice cracking. My father appeared behind her, his frame still large but stooped, his belligerence replaced by a weary confusion. Who is it, woman? He grumbled, then his eyes fell on me. The color drained from his face. He saw the car, the clothes, the impossible, unassailable confidence. He saw a stranger who wore the face of the daughter he had condemned to death. Papa, I said, the word flat, devoid of warmth. I did not wait for an invitation. I stepped past my speechless mother into the kitchen. It was exactly the same chipped sink, the same rough table. The air was thick with the smell of failure and boiled cabbage. What is this? My father managed, his voice weak. This is a business call, I said, placing my leather portfolio on the table. It was fine, expensive calfskin. I did not look at my mother. My company, Greywood, holds the note on your mortgage. You have defaulted on the last 3 payments. The shock on his face was a more satisfying revenge than any scream I could have uttered. He stared at me, his mind refusing to reconcile the beggar he had thrown out with the creditor who now held his life in her hands. You, he stammered. You are Greywood? I am, I said, opening the portfolio. I laid out the documents. They were real, legal, and utterly damning. The bank sold your debt to me 6 months ago. I have the right to foreclose, to seize this land, this house, everything. My mother began to weep, silent, hopeless tears. My father just stared at the papers, his world collapsing. This was the man who had told me I was nothing. He was now looking at the proof that I was everything. I let the silence hang, let them drown in it. Then I spoke again, my voice soft, but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. I am not here to destroy you. I slid a second set of documents across the table. This is a proposal. I am buying your land, not seizing it, buying it, for a fair price. Enough for you and mother to buy a small cottage in town, to live out your days in comfort. He looked up, his eyes brimming with a tumultuous mix of shame, awe, and desperation. Why, he croaked. I finally looked at my mother, then back at him. So you will never have to wonder where I sleep, or if I am warm, or if I have enough to eat. So you will live every day for the rest of your lives knowing that the child you cast into the snow was your only salvation. And so you will know that my scribbling, it built the future that your strength could not. I picked up my pen. The choice is yours. Sign the papers and have a life of peace, funded by the daughter you disowned, or refuse and be turned out of your home by the same. I did not wait for his answer. I had already won. The revenge was not in taking their home. It was in giving it back to them on my terms. It was in showing them that the greatest masterpiece I would ever create was not drawn with charcoal, but forged in the white silence of their betrayal. I had walked into the snow as nothing. I was returning as the architect of my own destiny, and now irrevocably of theirs. If this story made your heart race or your eyes tear up with justice, don't forget to support this video and keep the voice of silent revenge alive. Comment justice wins if you believe no wound should stay unanswered.